Subscribe to EditorUnwind. This story is about Ruby and Peter, a love beyond life. Ruby Mitchell had always been a quiet soul. She wasn't one for crowded parties or bustling social scenes. Instead, she found comfort in solitude, enjoying the simple pleasures of life, a good book, a walk by the lake, a cup of tea in the mornings. But people in her small town didn't understand her, not really. They saw her dining alone at the local bistro, sitting at a corner table, a slight smile on her lips, eyes glancing down at the empty chair across from her. They saw her at the cinema, slipping into the same seat every week for the late-night show, always alone. They whispered behind her back, wondering why she preferred to be so isolated. What they didn't know was that Ruby wasn't really alone at all. Her name was Ruby, and she had a secret. His name was Peter. Peter had been a ghost for as long as Ruby could remember. Their story began years ago, in a small apartment she had rented in a forgotten part of the city. She had felt an inexplicable pull to the old building when she first saw it. As though something, or someone, was waiting for her. The moment she stepped through the door, the air seemed to hum with a strange energy. At first, she thought it was just the dust settling. Or perhaps the isolation of the apartment that made the silence feel alive. But then, she saw him. It was late one night when she was reading on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. When she felt a chill brush past her, the air shifted, the temperature dropping just enough for her breath to become visible. Her heart quickened, but she didn't panic. She had always been attuned to things that others couldn't see. She looked up and there he was, Peter. He was nothing like the ghosts she'd read about in books. He wasn't transparent or haunting. In fact, he looked quite ordinary. In life, he must have been tall, with soft brown eyes that shone with a quiet intensity. His hair was a bit longer than what was fashionable. And he wore a simple shirt that was slightly out of date. He didn't seem frightened to be seen. There was no fear in his eyes, only a soft sadness. A sense of longing that Ruby felt in the pit of her stomach. "I'm sorry," she whispered, unsure of what else to say. "Are you a ghost?" Peter smiled softly, his expression one of gentle amusement. "I suppose you could say that," he replied, his voice warm, though it carried the unmistakable echo of something distant, something untouchable. "But I don't mean to frighten you." Ruby wasn't frightened, not at all. Instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection. It was as though their paths had crossed for a reason. As though they had always known each other, even if they hadn't met before. Over the following days and weeks, Ruby found herself drawn into Peter's world. He would appear to her in the mornings, sitting at the edge of her bed, watching her with a quiet affection. He would talk to her, tell her stories of his life before death, stories of adventures, of love, of loss. In return, Ruby would share her thoughts and dreams with him, the things that she hadn't told anyone else. In time, their bond deepened. It was strange at first. This love between a living woman and a man who no longer had a heartbeat, but Ruby didn't care. She was happy. Peter was her companion, her confidant, her love. No one else could see him, of course. The few times Ruby had tried to tell people about Peter, they had laughed or looked at her with concern. Her friends would frown when she said she had plans for the evening, certain that she was hiding some sort of loneliness. She didn't mind. She had Peter. He wasn't just a ghost. He was everything. Ruby continued with her life. And she became used to the strange looks and whispers. She didn't care what they thought. They didn't understand. They couldn't see Peter the way she could. Every night, he would join her for dinner. his presence invisible but undeniable. They would talk about everything and nothing, his memories of his life, her hopes for the future, the quiet peace they found in each other's company. Some nights, they would take walks around the lake, Ruby feeling the cool breeze while Peter walked beside her, invisible to everyone else. It was like a secret they shared. A love too powerful and beautiful for the world to comprehend. And Ruby was content. Peter was everything she needed. One evening, while they sat in a small, cozy theater watching an old film she had loved since childhood, Ruby glanced beside her, her heart swelling with affection as she saw the empty seat next to hers. She could feel Peter sitting there, as real and present as any living person. They didn't need anyone else. They had each other. It wasn't until a few years later, during a particularly quiet evening, that Ruby realized something. She was no longer bothered by the whispers or the stares. She didn't care that people thought she was strange. She didn't need their approval. Her love with Peter had transcended all of that. They had built a life together, one that no one else could understand, and that was enough for Ruby. Peter, who had once been a fleeting presence, was now fully part of her world. Sometimes, when she lay in bed at night, she could feel him there beside her, his ghostly form leaning in close to her, just as real and tangible as if he were still breathing. She could hear his heartbeat in her dreams, feel his hand in hers, and when she closed her eyes, she could see his face, smiling at her with a love that was all-encompassing. And though the world outside continued to murmur and gossip, Ruby knew one thing for certain: she was not alone. She never had been. She had Peter. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.